With both air and ground wars going badly, the Egyptian military's command and communication networks begin to crack. Commanders at headquarters don't know what's happening in the field. But these military disasters are kept from the Egyptian public. Jubilant crowds gather to listen as Radio Cairo announces victories. Each fictitious downed Israeli jet elicits cheers.
All we were allowed to broadcast were the announcements of the General Command. The command was telling of great victories. We have downed dozens of aircraft. Our forces are advancing in the Sinai, and commandos are already in Israeli territory. It gave us the impression we were achieving a great victory.
In Damascus, the Syrian Broadcasting Service is also reporting imaginary conquests.
The President of the Republic came to the TV station to make a speech to the nation. He encouraged the people, telling them that the war had started and that tomorrow we would have lunch in Tel Aviv.
Israel follows its own plan of disinformation. The public has not been told of the total victory of the Israeli air attack. Israelis learn about the war when air raid sirens signal them to go into shelters.
Moshe Dayan, as defense minister, gave an order. He ordered total radio silence on the first day of the war. Not one announcement on what the IDF was doing or its victories.
All the Israeli public hears is a general statement that the war has begun.
The reason for that was the fear of an immediate international intervention that would attempt to impose a ceasefire.
The Soviets soon learn about the war and the destruction of the Egyptian Air Force. At the Kremlin, the Politburo goes into emergency session.
The Politburo was trying to determine its position. Shall we get involved militarily or in some other way? The Israeli army was advancing inside Egypt. The whole situation was getting out of control. We had to decide what to do.
The Politburo opts for a bold stance. It rushes reinforcements to the Egyptian army and orders 41 MiG jet fighters to fly to a staging ground in Armenia. While preparing for war, the Soviets also activate the hotline and contact the White House directly. For this task, the Kremlin summons its foremost English translator, Viktor Sukhodrev.
I was led into a room where I saw not a telephone, but an ordinary teletype machine. And they had rolls of paper, a typewriter-style keyboard. That was it.
Then Premier Kosygin walks in.
Kosygin said, tell the White House that Chairman Kosygin is here at the apparatus and wants to talk to President Johnson.
About 7:15, the telephone rang. It was the duty officer in the war room. Mr. Secretary, Prime Minister Kosygin's on the hotline. He wishes to speak to the president. So the president came on the line. He said, in effect, God damn it, Bob, what are you calling me for at this time in the morning? I said, Mr. President, Prime Minister Kosygin's on the hotline. How do you wish to respond?
Kosygin started dictating. The Israelis were advancing into Egyptian territory, and it was therefore up to Israel's ally and supporter, the United States, to stop the aggression.
President Johnson doesn't want the Soviets to take unilateral military action. nor does he want to become entangled in Israel's war. Johnson writes back immediately. He promises Kosygin to work together with the Soviets in the United Nations and do everything possible to stop the war before it escalates. Radio Cairo's false news about Egyptian military successes has reached Arab Jerusalem, where it has an electrifying effect.
What's the radio saying about what's happening?
23 airmen for Israel.
23?
23 now.
Airplanes?
Yes, airplanes.
What, shut down?
Yes.
By this time, I had left the newspaper and run over to the radio station just to see what was going on. Because all they were doing was broadcasting military music and shouting slogans. And I remember saying to them, they're going to hit this place. And the head of the station saying, because he had some military experience, the head of the station. We were probably the only two people who had military experience. He had served in the Jordan Army. I had served in the American Army. Nobody else. That was the other amazing thing for me. Everybody's clamoring for war, all the young men, and none of them knew how to fire a rifle. And I was cautioned, don't talk that way. You're suggesting that the united might of the Arabs are not going to overwhelm Israel. They're going to come in here. How can you even think that way?
The truth is that on the first day, our morale was very high because all the information we got was that the Arabs were victorious. Israel jammed our military communications, so we were getting all our information from the radio. And the Egyptian Radio Cairo was giving wrong information.
In Amman, Jordan's King Hussein receives a message from Israel.
We appeal to King Hussein and to other neighbors to stay their hand, and Israel would do likewise.
But King Hussein can do little. He has signed a mutual defense treaty with his Arab neighbors, and his army is now under the control of an Egyptian, General Riyad.
We were fighting the war on the basis that it was an Arab joint effort. This is why the Egyptian general's views prevailed.
The Arab war plan calls for the Egyptian and Jordanian armies to cut Israel in half. But neither King Hussein nor General Riyad have any real information about the progress of the war, just public lies from Radio Cairo and private lies from the very top. Nasser calls the king and tells him that his planes are attacking Israel. He urges Hussein to seize as much territory as possible before a UN ceasefire. Minutes after this phone call, Jordanian guns and mortars start to shell the Israeli half of Jerusalem. This is the first attack on Israeli territory.
They started bringing in hundreds of wounded by ambulance and also by helicopter. There's a helicopter landing field over there.
Only 3 hours into the war with Egypt, the war has now expanded to include Jerusalem. The future of the Holy City, sacred to Muslims, Christians, and Jews, will be decided by force of arms in a battle that will resonate for generations. The battle for Jerusalem begins where the 1948 war left off. For close to 20 years, Jerusalem has been a city divided between Jordan and Israel. In his home, Jordanian soldier Badi Awad keeps a prize painting. It depicts how his unit defeated the Israelis in 1948 and captured the Jewish quarter. 19 years later, in 1967, he's back. This time to fight for the demilitarized UN compound.
I got a direct order to occupy the UN headquarters south of Jerusalem. I was to secure it from an Israeli incursion.
In the war room, the nerve center of Israel's military command, one man, General Moshe Dayan, defense minister for only 4 days, is making all the critical decisions. His prime concern is to avoid a war on multiple fronts, a potential disaster for the outnumbered Israeli forces. But Jerusalem is a special case. He decides he cannot put the city at risk. He authorizes the Israeli Central Command to engage in the battle for the UN headquarters.
One thing was clear to me. If I could quickly counterattack, I would be successful.
While Colonel Dar's tanks attack the high ground overlooking the headquarters, one platoon forces its way into the compound.
I was giving my orders from the heart of the battle. I was facing the enemy with my soldiers. We were positioned with 2 battalions forward and 1 to the rear in the compound.
By late afternoon, a wounded Asher Dar captures the UN headquarters. Now that a ground war with Jordan has begun, the military must control the road from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. In the war of 1948, that road, which runs through the Latrun Valley, was occupied by the Jordanian Legion. General Moshe Yotvat is assigned to secure the road. Yotvat is no stranger to this place. He fought here twice in 1948. And twice, the Israelis were unable to dislodge the valley's Jordanian defenders.
I was wounded in the battle. The platoon commander was wounded. Ariel Sharon was wounded. Actually, everyone who came out alive was wounded. The rest did not come out alive.
Now, Moshe Yotvat has another chance. He starts shelling the Jordanians. But the Jordanian Legion has withdrawn into the West Bank. Yotvat pursues them. In the war room in Amman, Jordan's military elite is watching disaster unfold. They want to defend and hold Jerusalem as they have done in the past. But their troops are now under the command of an Egyptian general, and he is following orders from Cairo to send Jordan's army away from Jerusalem.
They were shouting and screaming at each other, and they nearly fought because the Jordanians felt this was a battle of destiny for them. It meant the future of the West Bank, and in particular, Jerusalem.